We live in a fantasy world now. Reality has been destroyed.
This is the time that we really need to pay attention.
The probabilities are overwhelmingly on gold's side. That is the best environment to see gold increase its value.
Welcome to Palisades Gold Radio. I'm your host, Tom Odrovics. Joining me today is Martin Armstrong, hedge fund manager, international advisor, and author. How are you today, Martin?
Good. How are you doing?
Excellent. It's great to have you back. And, I'd like to kind of start by really digging into all of the cycle work that you do. After analyzing the interest rate cycle many years ago at different points in history, sometimes it was bullish, let's say, to raise interest rates, while other times it was viewed as bearish. Is this a perfect example to illustrate how you came to the economic confidence model that you built?
Yeah, I was doing research, and the only real research you can do is go through the old newspapers to really see what people were talking about back then. And I found it curious, like going into 1929, that they were raising interest rates and it was bullish. They were saying that proved people were still interested in borrowing. Whereas the Great Depression, they started lowering interest rates from back then it was 6% to 1%, and it didn't matter. And it makes sense. And studying all the different booms and busts, in 1899, the highest interest rate in the United States reached 200%. And, I've published charts on the call money rate from New York Stock Exchange, and they've been, the stock market's never peaked with the same level of interest rates twice. Mm-hmm. And the reason for this is what I finally realized is that it's the expectation that counts. So if you think the stock market will double, in 3 months, you'll pay 20% interest. But if you don't think it's going to go up 1%, you won't borrow 1%. So it's really expectation. And every type of inflation wave is different. This one, they can keep raising interest rates all they want, and it will only make it worse. Why? Because this is based on shortages. Mm-hmm. And not, speculative boom. You have to understand that some of these theories developed from World War I and the Great Depression and World War II. In World War I, it was the big commodity boom. The guy who became the richest man perhaps ever in history was Ogden Armour. Armour Meat Company, hot dogs, etc. He supplied all the food during World War I to all the Allies. And when it crashed after 1919, back then he lost the equivalent of $1 million a day for 130 days straight. And I had read his an interview that was in the Wall Street Journal. He was living, he lost absolutely everything. He was living off the charity of friends in London. And they asked him, how did it feel to lose that much? 130, back then, million in 1919 is like a trillionaire today. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, none of them have ever reached that level. All right. And he said he knew that he'd always be remembered for losing more money than anybody in history. But so they developed this idea that raising interest rates to stop inflation because it was a speculative boom in 1919. And so they tried raising the interest rates into 1929, and it had no effect. The market kept going up. So in 1929, what was different was that all the European capital came to America, and they were all investing in the auto stocks, which was kind of like the dot-com bubble back then, So it attracted all the international capital. Everybody wanted to get, these newfangled, objects here. And so this time we have shortages in commodities. So raising interest rates are not going to do anything. They're not going to suddenly make it rain, and you're going to have more wheat or anything of this nature. So then you have somebody like, Biden running around and trying to blame everything on Putin. And I think Putin even came out and says, now they even named inflation after me, But, they don't want to admit what they have done. I mean, it was the lockdowns that started the whole collapse in the supply chain. I mean, I was getting emails from farmers that had to kill like 30,000 chickens because there were no truckers. They couldn't take them to market. Another one sent me a video. He plowed a mountain of potatoes and buried them because he couldn't get them to market. So you ended up with shortages. A lot of farmers lost a lot of money, and you had small businesses that lost. I mean, my former assistant, she had got married with a guy, and they had just opened up a health spa in Philadelphia, maybe about 2 or 3 months before the lockdown started, and they lost everything. It's just, there's no understanding of what is happening. These politicians, they're like a horse in Central Park with the blinders on them. All they see what's immediately in front of their nose. And I mean, this is a major crisis. You take Europe, they lowered interest rates to negative in 2014. But simultaneously, they had previously passed laws that to be conservative, pension funds had to buy government bonds. So here we are in 2022, they're just now starting to look at raising interest rates. Yet these pension funds have been wiped out. They needed to make 8%, annually just to break even. So they don't look at these things. They say, we'll stimulate the economy, we'll make it negative. And it never happened. All right. So they left it there. And so now you wiped out the pension funds. And so now they have a real major financial crisis on the horizon. I've never seen, honestly, in more than 40 years of dealing with governments around the world, I've never seen a crop of world leaders as complete idiots that we have today. And I'm not talking about just Biden. I mean, just look at Trudeau in Canada. Then you just keep going. Macron, the Greens in Germany and Austria. It's nuts. It's just completely nuts.
If we think about, let's say, ascribing malice instead of stupidity, does that really fit the outcome or the behavior of the politicians a lot better?
In some cases, with the climate change, yes. I mean, I've had conversations and argued as that you people are out of your minds. I mean, the Greens have suddenly got this power, and they want to completely shut down fossil fuels now, before there is any alternative really up and running. And, I don't think they have any comprehension of what they're really doing. So are they all knowing? No. I mean, I think a lot of it is just absolutely stupidity. And then they judge the world by themselves. So here in North America, all right, we're not that devastated. but look at Pakistan. All right. There's a revolution there. In third world countries, you take energy up and people are living hand to mouth. They lose everything. So you ended up with a revolution. You'll see more of that in third world countries, and eventually will spread to the major countries.
You know, when we keep thinking about how governments are exerting this control on, let's say, whether it's economy or society or whatever, is this ultimately an error? And does the business cycle or, let's say power cycle ultimately re-exert its cyclical nature?
Yeah, I mean, there's just certain things. I think it takes a certain amount of time for the everything is driven by economics. People will vote based upon their personal opinion or their experience. In 1985, I took the back page of The Economist in London and announced that, okay, fine, we're shifting from a public wave to a private wave. And these things are 51.6 years in duration. And the turning point was 1985.65. So just calculating pi out from that. And I said, okay, fine, that will be the first time in this cycle, historically, you get a political change. That's when we could possibly see the first third type party president come to power. That, you add that out to 1985.65, and it was 2017.05, the very exact day that Donald Trump was sworn in. And I went down to Washington, and you have to understand, people are going to look at these things in their own self-interest. They were all, saying this is, it's a fluke. And I said, no, it's not a fluke. You don't understand. It was a vote against you, not that Trump was this wonderful guy on a white horse, etc. He was a non-politician. All right. So, actually, Putin received a 75% approval rating for the very same reason. Yeltsin turned to Putin, who was an unknown at the time. You had the oligarchs on one side, Baryshnovsky, et cetera, trying to take the government. And on the other side, you have the communists trying to reassert. And so Putin he was not affiliated with any political party. He stood, and he wasn't an oligarch. So Yeltsin turned to him, and it was the same thing. And everybody cheered. The Russian people cheered because he wasn't a politician. So it was the same, maybe motivation there behind it, and at that stage. And then you saw people like John Kerry after that, when Trump was elected, suddenly democracy became populism. Is this evil populism? At Davos, they were all in a state of panic because they suddenly realized they were all career politicians. That could possibly happen to them. So that's really where this great reset began to take form. It was like, if you look at Schwab's 8 points, in there is that democracy will come to an end, but we'll retain, your human rights and things of this nature. But that is his selling point was for government. You don't want somebody like Trump, coming to power in your country and you're thrown out on the street. So they really hate democracy. And here in North America, we don't look at it close enough. But look at how Schwab helped to shape the EU. The only people you vote for is a member of parliament. Parliament has no right, no power to overrule the European Commission. The European Commission is appointed. They never stand for election. The head of the EU, she never stands for election. She's appointed by the other heads. Okay. And it's actually the same type of political system that's in Russia, is that they say, oh, Putin, this is not democracy, it's an autocracy. It's exactly the same thing. Mm-hmm. The members of Duma voted for the head. Okay, fine. He had to be approved. This is what they do in Europe. Mm-hmm. But suddenly Europe is somehow different than Russia. It's not authoritarian when it is. If you're a European and you are really fed up with the head of the EU, she never stands for election. So you can't even vote her out. This is what they would like to do here in North America as well. Eliminate our right to vote and make us think that we still have it. You vote for, the street cleaner and stuff like that. That's about it. It's just local elections. I mean, this is really what their end goal is. Mm-hmm.
And, to your point, I think it really matters who's determining, as you said earlier, Martin, who's, retaining our quote unquote human rights. Well, if Klaus Schwab, is the one determining what our rights should be about owning nothing and being happy with that, seems like not a good future that I'm interested in.
Well, even that saying, you have to understand that you have to look behind the words carefully of when a politician speaks. Mm-hmm. And what he's really saying, that you'll own nothing and be happy, is he's trying to make it sound like we're doing this for you. Mm-hmm. When in fact, the governments can no longer fund themselves. The whole debt bubble is coming. They know they're going to default. So if the government's defaulted and then wipes out all the pension funds, so then what happens? You're going to have millions of people with pitchforks storming the parliaments over there. So what they're really doing is saying, oh, you're burdened by all your student loans, your car loans, your mortgage, all this stuff. We're going to help you. We're going to eliminate all debt. All right. But in the process, they're defaulting on theirs. Mm. So it's a shell game. They're trying to just make it sound like I'm doing it for you. Mm. This is, I only care about you, not myself,
Martin, there's another piece that I wanted to touch on as well. I did a podcast with a listener from Russia, and we were talking about, at the time, that Putin's approval rating, as you mentioned, was 75%. I think at the time I did that interview, it was 71%. What error rating, or do you think that is relatively accurate?
It's no, very accurate. I mean, mm-hmm. The problem is that you have Biden putting on these sanctions and things of this nature. You're publicly waging war against the Russian people. This idea is that, we'll make it so bad for the people and they'll overthrow Putin. Sanctions have never worked. They've had sanctions on Iran. I mean, I think the Ayatollah is still there. They have never worked, in history even once. But the idea is that they will overthrow their government. So now what you've done is you've shown that you're the enemy, not Putin. Mm. So Putin is basically, putting Russia first. So his polls are real. And we have to understand this. The same thing in Hungary, that, he had, his polls were also in the 70s. Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, when you have this stark view and people understand what's going on, then they're really going to choose sides. Like in Austria, bringing in all these people from the Middle East, they're not assimilating. So they've divided the country. And the same thing in Sweden, there are places you just can't walk. This has never happened before. Mm-hmm. So that whole idea of bringing them in, and that will help the pension funds because the birth rates are declining and we need more population. Well, they're not assimilating the way Europeans did in North America.
Yeah.
So it's a different religion. Germany, you can even Google it. I mean, Germany ended up having to put out a booklet like, you don't touch women, if you went to like Saudi Arabia with your wife, she had to wear a scarf. All right. If she went in a short skirt, oh my God, I mean, if she went out by herself, she would be arrested because it's assumption that she's like a prostitute. This is just religion in certain places, and I have a lot of Muslim friends. We have Muslims that work in our company, and people don't realize it's kind of like the difference between, I would say, the Catholics and the Protestants, like in Ireland. There are very stark differences, and you have that between Sunni and Shiite. Shiite basically believe that the Ayatollah should be running the state. All right. Whereas Sunni, they don't believe that. So you go to certain, that's why Saudi Arabia is against Iran. Saudi Arabia has kings. Iran doesn't think that's right. I was basically told that one, basically they follow Muhammad's brother-in-law and the other one follows Muhammad. So you have to understand that there are different cultures in even within every religion. And some, the woman's got to be completely covered in a burqa, and others they don't. It's you go to Turkey and you see, Islamic girls, but they're dressed like Western. So it all depends where you're at.
Martin, I want to get back to a question around trying to be objective about looking at data. When looking back at history with this objective view, you've come up with a different explanation for hyperinflation other than central banks printing or borrowing the currency into oblivion. If we take, for example, hyperinflations throughout history as the examples, what really changes consumer confidence in the currency and government that results in the ensuing hyperinflation?
Well, unfortunately, most of the hyperinflations like Germany have just been casually reported, and it was the printing of the money that caused it, and that's just not the case. You have to dig a little bit deeper, and it was December 1929 or 1922 when they couldn't pay the reparation payments, which were onerous, and even Keynes had said this is you shouldn't do this, etc. So Germany did the Weimar Republic at the time did a forced loan. They confiscated 10% of everybody's assets, and they gave you one of these bonds. Okay. And you can get them on eBay. They're not that expensive because they defaulted on them. But once you confiscated 10% of everybody's assets, the cash in the banks, then people basically bought every other foreign currency they could, or tangible items, or so it wasn't even just gold. It was art went up. In fact, when the hyperinflation collapsed, finally, and they issued a new currency, that was 1925. And you can buy those notes on eBay, as well. And they were backed by real estate because they didn't have any gold. So the hyperinflation came because the government seized 10% of everybody's assets. That collapsed the confidence in the Weimar Republic. People took whatever money they had out. And so there was no like taxation coming in, and they just started printing money to cover everything. Mm. So it's you don't see them printing money just for the sake of printing money. Mm-hmm. It has to do with, usually that is the result of something that's happened. Mm. Same thing in Zimbabwe or any of these things. Hungary went through it. It's a collapse in the confidence. I've recreated the monetary system of Rome, and we all know that Rome fell. But my question was, how did it fall? Was it like a 747 coming gradually in for a landing, or was it like a waterfall? Mm-hmm. So I collected the coins, and the Romans were great, I would say, secretaries, so to speak. The emperors wanted to pretend that it was still a republic. So the coins are actually dated. I was consul for the year number 1, number 2, number 3. So you know what year in his reign it was issued. Mm-hmm. Because a consul was appointed during the Republican period for 1 year. So he would renew that power every year on his coins. So, I mean, of course, it's like the EU today. There's no real election, all right? So you can actually date the coins. And that's how we have actually validated a lot of things from history. But we have, I put it together, and I had the coins tested for the metal content. And lo and behold, the collapse of Rome, the monetary system, took place only in 8 years. What caused it? There was an Emperor Valerian I, and he was captured in battle by the Persians. This is the first emperor ever taken prisoner. All right, so, and then his son, Gallienus, didn't have the power to go rescue him. So it would be more like Biden went to Russia to go visit Putin, and he put him in jail and say, yeah, come get him. And we couldn't. Kind of like that. So suddenly the confidence in the Roman Empire was shaken right to the foundation. This is the first emperor that's been captured. People started hoarding money. They didn't trust banks. So then to make ends meet, they started debasing the currency dramatically. That's when the barbarians from up north said, gee, the Persians got away with it. Maybe we should try it too. So then they started invading. So the whole confidence in the Roman Empire just collapsed. And then you start seeing separatist movements take place. There was the Gallic Empire that split off, which was basically France, Britain, and Spain, because they felt Rome could never defend them anymore. So they split off. Not that they wanted to conquer Rome, but they split off to defend themselves. So you see the same natural human responses. And so that's what you have to understand. People that look at just creating more money have been wrong. It has not produced hyperinflation in the United States. And a lot of those theories go back really to the 14th and to, I would say, the 16th century. There wasn't a financial capital per se. The money was all coins, and they traded on the exchange in Amsterdam based upon their metal content. So that was the foreign exchange rate. And it really wasn't until after that period that we start to see through trade. And, coming into the United States, America, Spain then rises and comes back with all this gold. So then it passes off to the Dutch. Then from the Dutch, the English took it, So you see these, the currency of the financial capital of the world is always the one that's dominate. So you have China issuing debt in British pounds up to 1914. Just as emerging markets today issue debt in dollars. So it's because that's where all the capital is. If I want to sell my debt, I'll issue it in dollars, and that makes it easier to sell.
Mm-hmm. So because of that, does global debt really matter at this point anymore?
The problem with debt is that it's really changed in its function. Under Bretton Woods, I mean, if you had $100 E-bond from the U.S. and you went down to the bank and you'd say, gee, I want to borrow on this. Can you give me $80? It was illegal. All right. You had to cash it in if you wanted the money. After Bretton Woods, everything changed. So if you want to trade futures, you post T-bills as collateral. All right. So now debt has just become currency that pays interest. Whereas before, the theory was if you borrowed, it was less inflationary because you couldn't use it. It wasn't collateral. So you weren't increasing the money supply. I mean, that was the theory. But today, people blame central banks, which is really kind of absurd because the central bank can't control the fiscal side. And they just print whatever they want to print and issue it as debt, and that debt becomes cash that pays interest. That's it. So the banks put up reserves with the Federal Reserve or central bank, and what do? They post government bonds. So it's the debt is just currency at this stage, and that's what Europe has failed to understand. So when they went to negative interest rates, they destroyed their bond market. Nobody will really buy them, so the central bank has to buy everything that's really coming out. And pension funds not going to say, yeah, gee, okay, fine, give me 10 years worth of negative bonds. They're losing money at anything below 8% to begin with. So it's the debt crisis that we have is really being promoted by Europe because going to these negative, they've wiped out their bond market. And that was really reflected here in the why Citibank withdrew from the repo market in August 2019. And the Fed had to step in. And why? Because they would no longer accept European bonds as collateral. I talked to some of the top banks in New York. They will not accept a German bond, French bond, anything. Okay, fine. Can I borrow against this? No, thank you. Goodbye. Mm-hmm. So that's why the Fed stepped into the repo market. Because the U.S. banks are going, well, when Merkel stood up and said, if Deutsche Bank fails, we're not going to bail it out, then why would you take its paper? It's too great of a risk. Mm-hmm. That was really behind the whole repo crisis, and that was in August. And then I believe that, the COVID thing was all manufactured as well. Is I do know that I was hearing rumors that a virus was coming August, September of 2019. I know Klaus Schwab even was telling friends, be careful, a virus is coming, and that was by January. So, then you get the crash. Bill Gates had started selling his stock out in December 19. And I think it was an exercise largely in pushing this authoritarian agenda, this great reset. Because then immediately, within weeks, they were saying, we get Build Back Better and all this other kind of stuff that was coming out. So you didn't come up with a plan, Build Back Better within 1 week. But they had everything ready to go. So it's the debt crisis that's causing that. They know this cannot go on, and that's what the Ukrainian war is about. It's the excuse to print money to defend ourselves.
Does this mean that, basically the road ahead lies MMT and UBI as the next probable outcomes?
There's a lot of, I would say, resistance towards the new monetary theory, but I think there's just too many academics that are on board with Schwab, and they think that this is the solution. It's to get out of this debt crisis that we have, a sovereign debt crisis, is to do this. And the difference here, and why I say they're going to fail, is that Marx's idea made more sense at the time in Russia, because Russia didn't eliminate serfdom until 1861. Then all of a sudden you had all these people free, very nice, but they own nothing. They couldn't even grow their own food. So, this Marxist idea, let's go get the rich. Yeah, okay, fine. They own everything and we can't get it. Made more sense. Today, people have a car, their house, whatever. Oh, you'll own nothing and be happy. It doesn't ring very loud today as it did back then. It's a completely different set of circumstances. So I think they have misunderstood that. But again, they're academics that don't look deeply. They just take the superficial idea.
You mentioned the current conflict in Ukraine. Does Socrates predict that there will be heavier conflict before a resolution, or that maybe China gets involved by going after Taiwan here?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's you have to understand that to pull off this great reset, they had three targets. They had to get rid of Trump because he stand in the way of climate change. The climate change agenda is mainly to create the one world government with the UN at the head of it. You see it also, you're using it with the WHO and stuff like this. That it takes a central government to defend the entire planet. This is the sales pitch. Then they had to get rid of Putin. And they have to get rid of Xi. And then they think they can conquer the entire world and put the UN as the head. Mm-hmm. It's a stupid decision, theory, but this is what they're really trying. So if you look at Ukraine, on February 20th, the U.S. sent Harris over to this Munich meeting. Now, at the very least, they should have sent the Secretary of State, all right, not the VP. And so she's just really, honestly, an idiot. And so somebody, gave her a slip and said, oh, you should say Ukraine should join NATO, which was a violation of the Belgrade Agreement. Most people don't realize, but when the Soviet Union collapsed in 91, Ukraine was the third largest nuclear power in the world. It had more nukes than China. So the negotiation was they gave up those nukes. Russia took them back. NATO promised not to go in, and Russia promised not to go in provided they remain neutral. Mm-hmm. So her blurting out, Ukraine should join NATO was a violation of that. Then you can Google, I think it was the Daily Wire reported on February 23rd, just 3 days later, Zelensky's up there saying that, we're going to reestablish nuclear weapons to defend against Russia. Putin then moved in the next day. Now, all the propaganda against Putin and Ukraine, that's what it is. Because if you're going to invade and conquer a country, all right, the standard military operation, as we did in Iraq, you take out the power grid, you take out the communications, and you take out the water. All right. He did none of that. All right. All these world leaders, Biden's wife even goes to Kiev. It's a war zone. It's not a war zone. Otherwise, if it was, why would all these world leaders be going there? They know Putin's just protecting the Donbass. That's it. Mm. So it's all propaganda. And people don't even understand what the history of the area is. Ukraine was never a nation prior to the Soviet Union. It was Ukraine means borderland. It was owned at the time by Lithuania, Poland. It was always going back and forth. And Kiev is on the river. The other side of the river, east, was the Russian Empire before the USSR. And most people don't realize that Khrushchev grew up there in the Donbass. All right, not in Moscow. He grew up there, and when after World War II, he was put in charge of Kiev to rebuild it. Mm-hmm. So when he became the leader of Russia in 1954, he's the one that took Crimea and assigned it to Kiev to be managed. All right, it wasn't Ukrainian territory. Neither was the East. So that's why the Donbass has all these Russian people. It was Russia before. All right. And so all this thing that, Zelensky, we're not going to give up 1 inch. That was a border written by Khrushchev. It wasn't your territory. The Ukrainians don't even live there. Mm. So it would be more or less like Mexico trying to say, well, Texas was ours before, so we're just going to take this, and you have to look at this stuff a little bit more, deeply. Mm-hmm. And in Russia, the ironic thing here is that the scholars there have had a long-term debate. Who is really Russian, and because Khrushchev was basically from the Donbass region, you could technically say that he was Ukrainian. You had Stalin, all right, who was one of the most ruthless people ever. He was from Georgia. All right, so it's ironic that in Georgia they hate Russians, but they hate them because their own guy is the one that oppressed their own country. So it's been a long-term debate as to who's really Russian, and because it was like the United States, a guy from California becomes president, or Louisiana or whatever. That's how the USSR was. And so they weren't all heads of state from Moscow. Mm-hmm.
Martin, is it possible that Putin is in some ways standing up for Europe and against the Davos crowd, seeing what their agenda is?
Oh, yes. I mean, if you can Google just Soros. I mean, he's been covered in Epoch Times and a number of newspapers coming out saying that Putin and Xi are threats to civilization. I mean, his idea of civilization is a one world government, all right, the UN. So they are promoting the overthrow of Putin and China, so they can create their little, backyard, fantasy land. And the problem here is that Putin is standing up to this, and so Xi. And it's so stupid. It's crazy. Fine, they got rid of Trump and they put in somebody that wouldn't, it's just going to drool over the paper and sign whatever they stick in front of them. It's really debatable, what the heck is going on here. But our computer does not show any way, shape, or form that they are going to succeed. We're heading more into World War III after 2024. And I'm more concerned about that period, although hostilities are going to increase sharply from this August, July, August, into particularly early 2023. You have them, Lithuania trying to suddenly put in blockades, things of this nature, and Putin's come out and said, "You do that, and it's on." So 2024 is not just Biden. You go down the list and you can see everybody that's up for re-election. Zelensky over there, Putin is up for election. The head of the EU, it's a watershed year politically. Honestly, I mean, I have people I speak to in Russia, and all the propaganda is always against Putin. Putin is probably the most reasonable guy that we have among world leaders. His problem is that he is nostalgic and a historian. Kiev is where Russia began. That was the first city of the Rus. The Mongols came in and destroyed it in 1240. So eventually they fled, and there was a country there briefly. It was called Galicia. And then, the Poles destroyed that. And then eventually they rose again in Moscow. All right. So to Putin, he did not want to nuke Kiev. I mean, that's like the fatherland to him. Mm-hmm. Whereas the other people behind him, if you look, they are often out there threatening nuclear war. All right. And my concern is you remove Putin, as they're saying, somebody should get rid of him. The next tier is much worse. And so that's why I'm more concerned about 2024, is I'm not so sure Putin will run again. But whoever's going to be there after Putin is going to be 10 times worse. I mean, much more hardline. Even their Secretary of State has acknowledged and publicly came out and says, look, this is a war of the United States against Russia. And that, the joke is that they'll fight till the last Ukrainian dies on the battlefield. So that's it. I mean, they're circumventing everything. Congress is the only one that has the power to declare war, but they define war as sending troops. Okay, so he can send all the military aid he wants, whatever. That's fine. So he can promote the war over there that way, but and prolong it. But until you start sending the troops on the ground, that requires Congress.
Mm-hmm. Martin, your model shows that 2032 is when that next great shift in the world could take place. Can you explain to us more about what that next, let's say, 10 years could look like, or even if you want to take from 24 to 32?
Well, it's going into that period. This is the collapse of the form of government that we know today, which is basically republics. A republic is where I can say, okay, fine, vote for me. I'll give you a lollipop and a free car or something. Then I get down to Washington. They go, okay, fine, that's very nice. Okay, this is the way you vote. You got to vote party line. So, republic is the worst form of government. I mean, even look at Zelensky. You can, Google, when he was elected on CNN. Even the Russians were very hopeful with him because he ran on a thing. He was going to end corruption and he was going to seek peace with Russia. And he's done exactly the opposite.
Exactly.
That's the problem with a republic. They simply are representative. So they represent their own self-interest. Once they get there, I'll give you $10 million, vote for this. Yeah, okay, fine. And that's what you end up with. Like I said, they should be like NASCAR drivers with a jacket with all the patches of everybody that's bribing them. Mm-hmm. So I think 2032 will be another collapse in our form of government, but this time it'll be republics. And hopefully we go to the third option, which will be more of a direct democracy. We certainly have the technology today. You go online, should we invade Ukraine? Yes or no? No, okay, or yes, or whatever you want to say. And there's no reason why we can't make that decision instead of somebody who's being bribed by, everybody from Pfizer to, normal, to every arms dealer in the country. Mm-hmm. So I would be, more inclined for that. The last time this happened, was the American Revolution, which was against monarchy. And then the French did the same. So everybody stood up and started overthrowing their monarchies. Even in Britain, the Queen still goes to Parliament, very nice, but she doesn't make the decisions on running the country. So they kept her there as a symbol, but not, actually doing anything. So I think that's what 2032 will be the turning point for our political type governments. And we get to redesign something else thereafter. And I'm hoping it will be direct democracy. But Trump was elected because he was not a career politician. Putin was cheered because he was not an oligarch or a communist. We need, I think that's what, you look at people, what they're going to vote for, they're going to basically just overthrow the whole system. That's it. It's just too corrupt.
Mm-hmm. Do you foresee central bank digital currencies becoming another form of control over this period?
Oh, absolutely. That's what they're pushing for. They will just seize all the cryptocurrencies and you'll get, one of these for two of those or whatever. But again, you can Google the Bank of England and their proposal that they wanted to include the power and the way they actually pitched it, I mean, it was amazing. But parents, should be able to restrict the money they give their children, so they can only buy lunch at a school rather than a chocolate bar. So once you put that in there, then the government can restrict whatever you spend your money on. Mm-hmm. So it's absolutely total control. I also think that, honestly, that blockchain was created by the government. I know they attribute to some Japanese guy or whatever. How come he has never come forward for all his royalties? And if I give you $100 bill, they don't know where I got it from. Mm-hmm. But if I gave you 100, in a cryptocurrency that's blockchain, they know exactly where I got it from, and they can trace it all the way back. That's the ultimate taxation level, period. Mm-hmm. They get to know where everything was. Did you pay your taxes when you got it?
If we look back, taking, for example, tulipmania.com bubble, all of these different bubbles that we've seen, do you think that the cryptocurrency bubble was one and the same of those types of cycles?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, they're based upon just a sales pitch that has no reality behind it. Mm-hmm. And that, I mean, at the time they were saying, Bitcoin is going to replace the dollar as reserve currency and all, and it's outside the central bank, so you don't have this, it restricted things. I mean, this is all very nice sales pitches, but it doesn't cut. You're in the middle of the Sahara Desert and you want a bottle of water. I don't think he's going to take a cryptocurrency. And the same thing, the danger of those is, as I said, Putin's not trying to take Ukraine. Otherwise, he would have taken out the power grid, the communications, and the water supply. Mm-hmm. You do that on an invasion of a country, what good is your digital currency going to do you? You can't go get a bottle of milk. You can't go get anything. It's going to, in my view, it's going to be back to tangible. I mean, it could even be a can of beans or something. And I think the biggest example of that in history, or I would say the most notorious, was actually Japan. Each emperor, what he did was he devalued all the outstanding coins to be worth only 10% of his new coins. So after a couple of times of this, the Japanese refused to accept Japanese coins. They used China's coins and they used bags of rice for money. So what happened was Japan actually lost the ability to issue coins for 600 years. It wasn't until the Meiji dynasty that coins were reintroduced in the 19th century. So for 600 years, there's no Japanese coins. So that shows what we were talking about before, the confidence in government. It collapsed. That was probably the most extreme duration of 600 years that I've ever seen. I mean, nobody else is going that far. Mm-hmm. I mean, you could say it took 600 years for the reintroduction of gold coins in Europe after the fall of Rome. That's true. But that's really what you're looking at.
Another cycle that you and I spoke a bit about last time was the gold cycle. And you explained that the idea of going back to a gold standard isn't the solution to all of our problems from a monetary standpoint because of the cyclical nature of everything in the world. So can you give us some perspective on where we might be in the gold cycle?
Well, gold will go up because all tangible things are going to rise. But the problem with the gold standard or pegging a currency, even like Switzerland pegged the Swiss franc to the euro, Bretton Woods, none of these things survive. Why? Because there is a business cycle. There are periods in time where food is plentiful and other times where it's in shortage. And you can't have money fixed at a standard value. Bretton Woods, they fixed, gold at $35. All right, fine. At the time, maybe it made sense. But then over that period, you up until 1971, you had all these, you had Democrats coming in, vote for me, and I'll give you this, I'll give you that, or whatever. So you had socialism come in, and that was based upon bribing people. So then you create more money to hand out so you get elected, but you're not creating gold to back the money. So suddenly the money supply far exceeds this tie to gold. And that's why Bretton Woods broke. But the same thing happens with all pegs. Southeast Asia currencies, the 97 Asian crisis. It will eventually happen with the Hong Kong peg to the dollar. Because what you're doing, as Hong Kong has pegged its currency to the US dollar, we end up with rising inflation, raising interest rates. That is now being imported to Hong Kong. So interest rates are rising there versus in China. Mm-hmm. So that's part of what these, the problem with standards and pegs create. It's you're importing or exporting the very same economic conditions behind that currency.
So when you say, Martin, that tangible assets will, keep going up at this point, do you mean, gold, silver, real estate? What are some of those tangible assets that you have
just
in mind?
About everything. I mean, you see antiques, ancient coins, art, stamps, all these things are rising. There was just like a Mercedes Gullwing that just sold for a couple $1 million.
Wasn't it like 30 million or something like that?
Something like
a couple,
that.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember, being offered one for like, $500,000. I mean, years ago. But it just ends up being crazy. I mean, there are a few Roman gold coins of Brutus with his portrait on the front, and the back it has 2 daggers and a cap, and it says Ides Mar. He's bragging that he killed Caesar on the Ides of March. The last one with a hole in it, no less, just sold for $2.2 million. The previous sale was like $200,000. I mean, it gets to the point. It's just unbelievable advances in price. I mean, it's crazy. Mm. But it's across the board. It's comic books. You see the first edition of Spider-Man bringing outrageous prices. So it seems like here in Florida, houses are going up quite sharply. I know a local real estate guy, and houses that are like 1 to 3 million. He says they're selling for cash. They're not mortgages. He says everybody's coming in with cash deals. So part of that is parking money. Part of it is just trying to get away from the crazy states up north. But there is definitely a mass exodus from like California, New York, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. I think I've met more people from New Jersey down here than I did when I was in New Jersey.
Do you see that housing market really starting to cool off, though, with the rising interest rates and mortgage rates?
In certain price areas and in certain areas, yes. Mm-hmm. If you are in an area that you should get out of, like Chicago or something like that. I mean, you get out as soon as you possibly can. But then you look at states where people are going to, and prices are still rising. And like I said, the higher priced ones seem to be going up as even in cash deals. They could care less about the interest rate.
Martin, something you and I kind of touched on a little bit before we hit record here this morning was, how hard it is for the average person to get real info about what's going on in the world today. So how bad is censorship getting? I believe it's today, there's a bill being introduced into Canadian Parliament about censorship. How bad is the let's say censorship or propaganda really in the world today? And how hard is it to find real information?
It's very hard. It's getting, most of the information I get is direct, really. I can't imagine much of like I said, I'm doing this new book, and I have the on one instance, I put in the newspaper account of Yeltsin and Clinton meeting in Turkey. And it says, they're bashing each other, blah, blah, blah. And then I have the declassified phone call. Yes, I know we got to take jabs at each other now and then. It's not, okay, fine. It's all theater. It's just theater. That's it. And in the phone call, Yeltsin's going, look, you're funding these terrorists that are going into Chechnya. Bill, this is your fault. I mean, they're not talking like enemies. And then you read the newspapers like, oh, he bashed them, and they're like, he's telling them they got to stop Chechnya and stuff. It's what is happening behind the scenes versus what's in the newspapers is completely different.
Excellent, Martin. Well, I think that's a fairly good place to wrap up today's conversation. Is there anything you'd like to add before we do?
No, I mean, it's, I hope to come out with a book very soon. I've got a hold of all the declassified documents from the Clinton administration, showing how Putin came to power. I mean, all this stuff is very, very interesting. It's completely different than anything you've seen in the press or even in history books.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, of course, if our listeners want more from you, they can find you on Twitter at Strong Economics and ArmstrongEconomics.com as well, right?
Yes.
And you have a lot of excellent free articles on your blog there that covers a lot of the topics that we did here today.
Yeah, we believe that you can go in there. You don't have to register or anything of that nature. We try to keep it as an open forum, and it's mainly there for a public service.
Mm-hmm. Well, I really appreciate your time and sharing your opinion and your research with us here today, Martin. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. This podcast is for general informational purposes only. Nothing on this podcast should be taken as investment advice. Guests on this show are not compensated for their appearance. Listeners are urged to educate themselves and make their own decisions. Do not base any investment decisions on the information contained. To view our full disclaimer, please visit our website.